So thank you all for welcoming me tonight. I am going to be talking about really important topics, I think, about our human sexuality and how that relates to our faith, how that relates to authentic freedom, and then sort of the hot button issues you might have heard about in the news and things like that recently, contraception and sterilization, the Human Health and Services mandate through Obamacare. This issue is definitely in the news right now, and it's a really important one, and we're going to talk about it. So I thought it would be relevant if I kind of gave a little background on my story and how I'm kind of standing before you tonight. So like he mentioned, I'm from southern Indiana and went to college in Indiana, then was just called, I think, down to the vibrant Catholic city of New Orleans for my medical school training, and I say my conversion really took off in that realm because going to Catholic school my whole life, growing up in a big Catholic family, one of 7 kids, we definitely, went to Mass, did sacraments, things like that, but I wouldn't say we talked a lot about our sexuality. I don't know if I don't think that our parents' generation, the baby boomers, were maybe catechized all that well. So I think a lot of us have questions, and it's like, what is the church teaching? How does that relate to my life? So I do know that, I myself didn't really know anything about it either. And my sisters and I had made a pact a long time ago that we were going to wait till marriage to have sex. And I was like, well, I'll just probably go on the birth control pill when I get married someday. I didn't think much else of it. I didn't really know that there were any other options. So when I was in medical school and I was starting to learn more about my faith and learn more about medicine, the question was posed to me, is it possible to be a doctor and an authentic Catholic? Is that even possible? What would that look like? A really good friend from home, a priest, Father John, he basically introduced me to church teaching on this issue. He pointed me to Humanae Vitae, to learning about natural family planning, something I certainly didn't learn about in my medical school curriculum. And as I learned more and was reading and praying and talking with others that I met, it was really exciting. And I'm like, okay, maybe this is possible. Maybe there are people out there doing this. And believe it or not, there's a national medical society called the Catholic Medical Association. And they promote and uphold the teachings of the Catholic Church across all realms of medicine, upholding the dignity of all human life. And this was just such a blessing to me. I was like, okay, there are people that are doing this. I can find them. I can figure this out. And I say I, but of course it was God and the Holy Spirit leading me on this journey. And at Tulane, I was blessed to meet some other fellow Catholics. Several of them were Notre Dame grads as well. There's people from Notre Dame that go down to Tulane every year for whatever reason, but we were able to start a student section of the National Catholic Medical Association, and through that, I actually was able to go to the March for Life for the first time in Washington, D.C., and that was just an amazing experience. Be around so many people witnessing to the gospel of life and praying for an end to abortion in this country. It was just truly amazing. And it's there that I met another really influential man, another John, Dr. John, in my life, and he became a mentor to me. Dr. John is an OBGYN. He has the largest pro-life OBGYN practice in the United States and right outside Washington, D.C. And he actually had fallen away from the church in his early years, kind of had this really powerful conversion experience at Medjugorje, and then he converted from doing abortion, from helping to formulate the birth control pill, and to kind of going the total 180, not prescribing contraception, not doing sterilization, certainly not doing abortions, and speaking about Catholicism and medicine. He's actually testified before Congress on pro-life legislation and things like that. So I had the ability to meet him, work with him, study from him, learn with him, and he's been a great friend and example to me. So I guess through those conversations with him, I was like, okay, I'm starting to understand church teaching on contraception, and I'm going to get more into that, but just, again, giving the preface here to set the tone for the talk. But then I was like, okay, what does that look like in the real world? And so as I was discerning what field of medicine I wanted to go into, women's health was definitely something I was passionate about, I am passionate about. I was able to do a rotation in New Orleans at a pregnancy center right next door to the largest abortion clinic in Louisiana. And I've been there, I've talked to these women, they are in crisis. They feel like they have no options, no choice. And to be able to learn with the counselors and physicians that I worked with there on how to counsel women, how to talk to women, how to talk to grandmas calling in on the phone asking for abortions for their granddaughters, it was a really powerful experience. And as I was realizing, okay, if I'm not going to prescribe contraception, hormonal forms of it, what can I offer? And that's when I learned about the various methods of natural family planning, which I'll also briefly discuss a little bit later. And there's actually something bigger than natural family planning, so a medical application of it, basically, where we can teach a woman how to chart her cycle. And sorry, men, there's going to be talks, a few mentions here and there about women and their cycle, so bear with me. But with that information, it's really amazing, because as a doctor, I can look at this and say, okay, here's where things are going wrong, and here's where we could do targeted medical therapy and actually correct things back to normal, which is what we do in every other realm of medicine: cardiology, pulmonology, infectious disease, try to get the body back to normal. Whereas in reproductive medicine, with women's health, the birth control pill is like a Band-Aid. It's basically just, shutting everything down, not really correcting the problem, and it's not good medicine. So my church from home, actually, in Evansville, Indiana, raised over $5,000 for me to go to the Creighton NAPRO, or Natural Procreative Technology, training in Omaha, Nebraska, as a fourth-year medical student. So that was just another huge leap for me in terms of my own journey and my own education. So then as I was applying to family medicine residencies, looking to graduate medical school and go on to residency, because I felt God calling me to family medicine, which I do full spectrum care, deliver babies, take care of the elderly, and everybody in between. I couldn't choose basically in medical school. I loved everything. So true family medicine doctor. But I was a little nervous about talking to each of the program directors on my interview trail, and explaining, how does your program handle this? My plans are to prescribe natural family planning only for family planning purposes, and how would your program handle that? And for the most part, everyone was very gracious. So again, by God's grace, I ended up back here in Indiana, in Indianapolis. I'm up at St. Vincent on the north side, and there's really no doubt in my mind that this is where God called me to. I just met some amazing people up there. My colleagues are great, and we really worked to, at a Catholic institution, nobody was teaching or doing natural family planning in our clinic. In my clinic, we see mainly underserved, no insurance, Medicaid, a lot of immigrants, legal and illegal, and people, Medicare, Medicaid, like I mentioned. So a very much in-need population, and basically nobody was talking about this. So we've been able to get it into our lecture series, to get some education for other resident clients. A few of my colleagues and I wrote a grant proposal to the hospital, and we're able to get a lot of money to support our patients learning this, so that cost is not a barrier, because cost is certainly not a barrier, although the government would like us to think otherwise, to getting birth control pills and things like that for our patients. So that's kind of my story and where I am, and just continuing to do this work and promoting NFP and working with the men and women that I see in my clinic. And I tell you all this because it tells you where I am right now, and then it might sound all kind of rosy and, oh, this is nice, it hasn't been that hard for you, really. But I have to say, it's really challenging. It's really hard in the daily struggles. Seeing patients and seeing their pain and the suffering that, our brothers and sisters, us ourselves and our brothers and sisters are experiencing in the realm of our sexuality and marriage and the family and the breakdown of the family, and how that's affected every aspect of human life and people's vision of themselves and their ability to get jobs and their ability to seek happiness. So that's why we're talking about this tonight, and it's really important. I'd say that I don't want to disparage by any means my colleagues who do prescribe contraception, or my patients and other folks who do think it's a valid option. I'm just trying to seek truth, and I'm going to talk about truth and freedom and how those are so intricately linked. And we have the church, we have this great leader in this realm, and I think that many of my colleagues definitely want to protect women and take good care of them, but I think what they're missing is that they're not honoring women. women don't just want to be protected and, told this is what you need to do, or I know better, or you're not the sort of person who should be having any more kids, because they say that. People think that. And that's just such a violation of each woman's dignity. And men, too. Men can't control themselves. These teenage boys, definitely they need condoms, this, that. It's not God's plan for us. So that kind of leads me into freedom. And what is freedom? So a lot of people have taken issue with this topic for many years with the church, because people are like, what do a bunch of priests, men know about women and men and about our sexuality and about freedom? Because our society has taught us that freedom is doing whatever we want, whenever we want it, however we want it. No questions asked. There's nobody judging you for that. You do your thing, I'll do mine. That's it. And that's not really what the church teaches. That's not what Christ told us. Only by following Him can we truly be free. Freedom, if you look it up in the dictionary, is the absence of physical constraint and also of psychological compulsion. So, children can be taught to do something for a reward or not do something for punishment, but are they truly free? Same with ourselves. We can, through discipline, learn to, as a medical student, go for many hours without sleep and be able to do that. We can work hard in sports and, suffer through physical pain. And, some might say, well, those practices are an infringement on your freedom, but you're choosing to go through that, to suffer, to kind of maintain that inner freedom and be free of these physical and psychological constraints. The human person really thrives on this discipline. I don't know if anybody has experienced, when I get a day off, sometimes it's like, I just feel like I want to be lazy, lay around the house and do nothing. And some days that's great, but some days it's like, man, I feel like I wasted my day off, because we want to be doing something and to be active. And if I go help a friend or I meet somebody or something like that, and we've all probably experienced that, maybe you didn't want to, or you were tired, but you went to help a friend move, or you volunteered at the soup kitchen, or whatever it may be, you end up feeling better about yourself. And even if you were tired, it's worth it, because it's that gift of ourselves, and that's true freedom. So a lot of people say that, I guess when we consider the law of God to be a hindrance to our freedom, really we're being fooled. That's the devil at work, because obedience is not something to be avoided at all costs. God is not a hostile force imposing His will upon us. He gave us the gift of free will, and He wants us to choose Him freely and to choose His love and to choose His path. Moral law does not constrain us. We have the ability to obey it or violate it. That's our freedom. But where does the issue come up? The issue comes in with sin, because moral law is intended to safeguard our dignity as people. Human freedom and divine law have the same end. We're not at odds with each other, but unfortunately, that's certainly not what the world teaches, and that's not, what our modern wisdom shows. So people think the church is irrelevant, but this teaching is true. We all know it in our hearts. Truth is written in our hearts, and we seek God and we're yearning for Him. So sin is what keeps us fit from being free. All of these things in life, all the things that God gave us for pleasure, food, music, friendships, relationships, our sexuality, all of those things are good when they're rightly ordered. When we have God first, everything else falls into line. But when we put one of those things first before the others, then we become almost a slave to that thing. You can look at it in any aspect. Food, gluttony, obesity. Look at the, epidemic with food. Drink. What Benjamin Franklin said, beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. But if we put beer first, alcohol first, alcoholism, addiction, I've seen it. It's a horrible illness. The cure rates are negligible. Like less than 10% are able to overcome alcohol and drug addiction. It's a huge burden on societies, on families, resources. Our sexuality, sex rightly ordered is a beautiful thing. It's a gift from God, meant to be unitive and procreative between the couple, and I'll get more to that. But wrongly ordered, it leads to pornography, adultery, sex trafficking, divorce, just all of these things. So Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. He also said the truth will set you free. So the way to true freedom is through Jesus, by turning from sin and turning towards Him. And of course, that's a daily struggle. Every day, we can try not to sin, but we live in a fallen world, and we're going to make mistakes, and that's where we go running back to grace and back to God's glory and His mercy. So I want to change gears a little bit and talk more specifically about our sexuality and our bodies. Some of you might have heard of theology of the body, which is Blessed Pope John Paul II's basically interpretation of Scripture, and how our bodies are not only biological, but they're theological. So our bodies tell a story about God, and they can reveal God to us. And it's just really beautiful teaching, and I know some of you all have done the training, and I'm just starting to dig into it and unpack it, and there's just so much beauty and truth in this teaching. Men and women are made in the image and likeness of God, so therefore we reveal truths about God. And sexuality is a reflection of God's plan for men and women to be in union with each other, but also in union with Him. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about women and then about men. So women, mystery is our nature, our personalities and our bodies. You can ask any man and they can probably attest to that. Biologically, women are different every day of the month. The female hormones, estrogen and progesterone, are different. It's like a dance. They're just different and changing every day of the month. So women are like this, our personalities. Men, their hormones are the same. Men are like this. So when men say, I don't get it, one day she's like this, and the next day she's like that, it's like, yes, that's because that's actually physically true. And men are just very constant. So women, by our very bodies, are a mystery. Our intimate organs are on the inside. You can't see them. You don't know what's going on. They're hidden away. The same is true of our personalities. We have gifts. Our gift is relationships and relating to other people, our emotions, their ability to be intimate. Women often go to the bathroom in packs. We love being together. So those are truths about women and about what our bodies tell us. The Bible teaches that, that mystery is something that's worth being pursued. I think it's in Genesis. Jacob fell in love with Rachel, and he worked for her father for 7 years, and in exchange for her hand in marriage. And after those 7 years, the father said, I don't think so. So he worked another 7 years. And he said, a day flies by, a year is but a day, because of my love for her. And so I think women forget that sometimes. We are worthy of pursuit. And what can women do to help men see that? Become the best version of ourselves. Do what it is each day that God is calling us to do, to be the women that He wants us to be. Somebody once said, a woman should be so hidden in Christ that a man has to come to Christ in order to find her. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Of course, that's not the message that our modern media portrays. Our modern media says that we're valued by our ability to get a reaction from a man, basically, by our looks, by our sexuality, be sexy, Cosmo, Glamour, all those magazines. It's, what can you do to be sexier, to get the attention of men, to keep your man, that sort of thing. And when your value as a person is wrapped up in your looks only, that's so shallow. That leaves women feeling empty. And again, I've seen that in, the women that I see in clinic, the teenagers. So many teenage girls I see who are sexually active and don't even want to be having sex, and I'll joke with them, gosh, you deserve better than that. You deserve the best. And all I can do is hope to plant a seed so that they can see, that we can see, that we deserve so much more. Sometimes I'll joke, you don't have a sign across your head that says, I sleep with jerks, do you? And they'll laugh, but it's like, how can I just show you that love that God has for you? And there's only so much you can do in a 15 or 30-minute visit, but this is a daily struggle, and just helping women to see that is so important. So in the context of her sexuality, it's that openness to man that allows a woman to bear fruit, to bear children. And again, that's just written into our very bodies, and it's so important. Mary really exemplifies this openness. She was open to the will of God and brought God into the world. And that's the vocation of all women, to do what God is calling us to reflect Him. And I think John Paul II sums it up very well, and this will kind of end my little stint on women. But he says, "Thank you, every woman, for the simple fact of being a woman. Through the insight that is so much a part of your womanhood, you enrich the world's understanding and help to make human relations more honest and authentic." It's pretty beautiful stuff. So switching gears, let's go to men. Now, I'm not a man, obviously, but I think we all have men in our life, and we can understand that, or see that men are hungry. Men are hungry for the truth about love and sex and life. And those things are rightly ordered when they're in the context of God, eating at God's banquet versus the junk food that our society gives us. Pornography, contraception, promiscuity, all of those things. The problem isn't that we're hungry, and I think that's where our Protestant brothers and sisters have maybe got it wrong, that our sexuality is something to be stamped out, that our sexual desires are wrong, and sex and religion don't go together. But that's not true. Again, our sexuality is a gift from God, so it's not wrong. It's beautiful. It mirrors Him, and it's just our hypersexualized culture, sin, that kind of disorders that sexuality and makes it something that it's not supposed to be. Again, as women's bodies, by their very nature, are meant to, be open to new life and bearing new life, men's bodies as well show that they are givers. Give the life-giving love. So it's men and women together. Again, our sexuality is stamped into our very bodies. We can't ignore it. We can't change it. And it's a gift. Men reveal their identities in their bodies just as women did. Men are strong. Women are graceful. And it's that strength, again, that is revered in men. We all revere athletes, professional athletes. Sports are great. They teach us a lot about life, but I think sometimes in America, sports can become like God or like religion. We worship football or basketball or whatever it may be. And again, those things are good, but in the proper context. Superheroes in movies are always very masculine, and so strength is a very important quality, but I think the outer strength is supposed to reflect a man's inner strength. And it's that interior strength that really can harmonize with women. And I guess, as I mentioned, that Mary was kind of the model for women, Jesus is the model for men. Christ as a model of manhood, He came, and the Old Testament talked about, the Messiah would come and be a servant, and He defied logic. The Jews were looking for a mighty warrior like King David to slay people and, go to battle, and Jesus came to serve and to lay down His life. So that is the ultimate example of what true manhood is, and that men are called to make sacrifices for the good of others and not sacrifice others for their selfish purposes. The same is true for women, but I think that's really important. Today's the feast of St. Ignatius of Loyola, and I feel a kind of personal connection to Ignatian spirituality. I was introduced to it in New Orleans, but in most Jesuit schools are all boys, and their motto is men for others. And I think, at that age especially, to teach young men, what it is to be a true man, to sacrifice yourself and give for others, whether that be friends, family, loved ones, the poor, the needy. It's a really important lesson. Ignatius said that the human person is created to praise, reverence, and serve God our Lord, and by doing so, to save his or her soul. So I just think that's so beautiful. Kind of a last part about this, and then I'll change gears a little bit, keeping an eye on time. So again, purity is something that our society kind of looks down on, chastity, purity, but in fact, we need to allow our hearts to be transformed by God so that we want the good of a man or the good of a woman. And it's only through discipline that we can experience that. And again, it's not the sexual desire that's wrong, but it's just when it's not rightly ordered. And through God and through love and through prayer, those desires can be perfected in marital love. So that kind of brings me along the road to Humanae Vitae, which is teaching that came out in the 60s from the church, basically upholding God's vision of love, of marriage and married love. And I think that a little bit of the historical context is important here. All of Christianity actually was on the same page about contraception and marriage and sex until the 1930 Lambeth Conference, when the Anglicans basically said contraception can be considered moral in certain circumstances, and that basically has snowballed in our era today to any and all circumstances. And the Catholic Church, everyone expected her to basically say, yes, it's okay in the 60s, and Humanae Vitae, of Human Life, came out by Pope Paul VI, and he said that marriage is a gift from God, that the marital act is a gift, and that it's supposed to be both unitive between the husband and wife and also procreative, open to new life. So sex is for babies and bonding. And if you're not ready to be a parent, then, sex for pleasure isn't the way God intended it. And so it's supposed to be to that higher order. I'm just going to quote here from Humanae Vitae. Marriage, then, is far from being the effect of chance or the result of the blind evolution of natural forces. It is in reality the wise and provident institution of God the Creator, whose purpose was to effect in man his loving design. As a consequence, husband and wife, through that mutual gift of themselves, which is specific and exclusive to them alone, develop that union of two persons in which they perfect one another, cooperating with God in the generation and rearing of new lives. Pope Paul VI talked a lot about the fruits of contraception and what that would bring to our society, and I think we're seeing those things. He predicted, the increase in teen pregnancy and out-of-wedlock pregnancies, and STDs, adultery, pornography, crime, cohabitation, sex crimes, infertility, abortion, a general decline of morality in society. I don't know about you, but I think some of us could agree that we're there, that those things have happened, and how did that happen? And, he talked about when it's not open to that procreative effect, that procreative nature of the act, then that gives each spouse the chance to use the other person for their own ends, for their selfish means, and that's not God's plan, as we've kind of talked about. We can't ignore what our bodies tell us. So I've mentioned contraception a few times. I want to kind of change gears and go into that a little bit. So what is it? What is contraception? When I talk to my patients about it, there's 4 big categories. There's the barrier methods, there's hormonal methods, there is sterilization, and there are natural methods. And by and large, I'm going to talk a little bit mostly about hormonal and mention the others as well. But many women and men don't understand how it works. It works in several ways, and you can find this on the package inserts for the pill and the IUD and those things. It works by preventing a woman, okay, again, a few medical terms here. So it prevents ovulation, or the release of an egg to make a new baby. It dries up cervical mucus, which helps sperm meet eggs to make new babies, and mainly works those first 2 ways. But there's a third way, and it's a possible way that hormones work, and that is by making the lining of a woman's womb or uterus very thin. So if a new baby is conceived, that baby is lost as an early abortion or early loss of pregnancy. And a lot of women don't realize that. And I do mention this in my talk, and I don't overstate the possibility that that could happen, but I think it's important to mention it. Anytime in medicine that we're doing procedures or we're giving medicines, we always have to talk about risks and benefits and possible side effects and informed consent, making sure people know what they're signing up for. Many women are surprised and are like, wow, I never knew that. I wish I would have. I would maybe like to choose something different. So I think it's really important to understand that. The next is possible side effects. So the hormones are not benign things, and small side effects are things like bloating, acne, weight gain, but more serious side effects are possibility of blood clots, strokes, heart attacks, liver tumors, and there's even some controversy about the possible risk of birth control pills and the link to breast cancer. Now, any medical society, the OBGYNs, family medicine, nobody is going to officially recognize that, but there's a lot of studies out there, and I have some resources, or if you're interested in more information, I can point you in the right direction. But there's a lot of literature out there that says perhaps the use of hormones has contributed to the increase in breast cancer since the 60s of 400%. Breast cancer has increased 400% in the last 40 years. And what has happened since then? So those are some side effects. And then the last, or the unintended side effects, are some of the other things I mentioned. You know, the effect on relationships, the effect on pregnancy, STDs, all those things. So, let's see, how am I doing on time? Good? Okay. Okay. All right. So again, I think when you take out that procreative aspect of the marital act, men and women get reduced to their parts. And now I just talked about how our parts are important, our bodies are important, and that reveals truth about ourselves and about God. But when you take out that possible of childbearing possibility, it reduces things. Now some people say, oh, so you know, if a couple is infertile or is older, then their marital act doesn't have as much meaning. And no, that's not true. Just because it's all about the intention. So just because someone cannot have a child, and that is a huge burden that many people bear, and I've seen those patients and taken care of them, that doesn't negate any less, the marital act or that man or woman's dignity. So again, a few patient examples. We talk about, correcting things back to normal and what is good medicine, and I've just seen so many women put on these powerful medicines that there really isn't a good medical indication. And we're taught, again, how to correct things back to normal, and some women are like, oh yeah, I liked having my monthly cycle or whatever, and now I guess I'm not having one, so it's not a big deal, but I was having issues, and then when they try to come off of it down the road and they're having problems getting pregnant, then they get directed to the local IVF or in vitro fertilization clinic. So I think it's really important to educate men and women about the truth of this. How do men kind of fit into this contraception picture? Well, certainly, if you want what's best for your wife, then you don't want to subject her to these unnecessary risks. The other thing is, people say, well, what about condoms or sterilization? Well, again, directly damaging our bodies and damaging the gift that God gave us in terms of sterilization, that goes against God's plan, and that doesn't make Him happy. There's a lot of references in the Bible actually to contraception. In Genesis, be fruitful and multiply. In Matthew, he says, Jesus says, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. The two shall become one flesh. What God has joined together, no human being must separate. So that's where, again, I've talked a lot about, too, the procreative aspect and how you really can't separate sex from that, but also the unitive aspect for people who aren't able to have children. It's a total gift of self to the other person, and if you're like, well, I want to give you all of me except the life-giving part, that's kind of a big deal. Our words have meaning, but our bodies have meaning too, and our actions speak louder than words often. We've all heard that one. So that's what I want to say about that. So in talking about this with a lot of my colleagues and my patients and my staff who are very skeptical and think that natural family planning can't work, which I guess that's what I'm leading up to next, can't work for our population. One of my colleagues said, Casey, you can't change a culture. And I'm like, well, but if we don't try, how's it ever going to happen? And it's not me trying to change things, it's just trying to bring the truth. Again, searching for that truth, and in truth we can be free. And I've seen so many doctors that I've worked with, nurses, colleagues who, as they've learned and dug deeper, prayed about this, who themselves have had conversions of heart and said, you know what, I feel free not having to do this, to be able to give people the truth about their bodies, about families, and about our sexuality. So Mother Teresa said we're called to be faithful, not successful. So just trying to do what we can. Like I said, in these challenging situations with my patients, that's all I can do. I'm going to wrap up here with, so if, that's all well and good, maybe you can get on board, okay, contraception might not be God's plan, but then what do you have to offer me? And that's where my training in medical school and just the way that the Holy Spirit worked and made that available was so important. So God doesn't expect women to be baby machines, and he actually has kind of written a plan for responsible parenthood and for spacing children into our very bodies. Again, he's really brilliant. And an aside here, there's a book there's a book about the human body and biology. One of my friends in medical school, who is kind of, I guess, not truly an atheist, she was agnostic, but I got her to read this book, and I think she really began thinking seriously about God, because in medical school we just learn, most people have no idea what's happening in their bodies, like on a day-to-day basis. Just all this signaling and everything that happens, just our blood flow, our nerves, our brain, our hearts, just how it all works together. It's just fascinating. I love it. I could talk about it forever, but so, what do our bodies tell us? What is the science of this? How can we space families reasonably and within God's plan? So that's where natural family planning comes into effect, or fertility awareness. So again, men, flatline, women, the harmony and the ups and downs. And in that, basically a couple's fertility is always based on a woman's fertility, because men are pretty much considered to be all the time fertile. Women actually have a very small window of fertility, and so many different physicians and scientists have tapped into that. And a woman can learn to chart her cycle. It's very easy. Most women find it becomes easily a part of their routine. It's very empowering to women, actually, and to couples to have this information on a day-to-day basis, and then to be able to use that information to plan their families. Some common objections I get are, come on, natural family planning, isn't that the rhythm method? That doesn't work. I'm like, actually, it's not the rhythm method. It's, again, a day-to-day picture of what's actually happening, and it gives me as a provider a lot of information about what's going on with that woman or with the couple and their fertility. And in terms of effectiveness, the birth control pill is about 96% effective at preventing pregnancy. Condoms about 85%. Sterilization, of course, much higher, although there are still pregnancies that can occur after vasectomy or tubals. But natural methods are 96 to 97% effective at preventing pregnancy if used the way they're intended. So the highest level, basically same as the birth control pill. And a lot of people are really surprised to hear that. On the flip side, for couples struggling with infertility, the natural methods can help couples achieve pregnancy and are actually more successful than in vitro fertilization or some of the other reproductive technologies that I'm not really going to go into a lot of detail about tonight. So, answer to the question, yes, it works, and it's not the rhythm method. Another common objection is, oh, isn't that just Catholic contraception? And in a way, it could be. So if you're always avoiding, and you and your husband aren't really having that discussion about, what is God's plan for our family? What is our intention? God says that we do have good, just reasons to avoid having another baby, maybe illness, financial difficulties, taking care of an elderly relative, those kinds of things. So it's up to the couple each month to have that discussion and to be discerning God's will in their lives as a couple and in their ability and possibility of having children. I think, too, this beautiful method called natural family planning really helps couples to appreciate children. Children are a gift. They're the supreme gift of marriage, and Pope Paul VI talked about that in a lot of detail, very eloquent language in his encyclical Humanae Vitae, but we don't value children. I think we could all attest to that. Abortion, and we're manufacturing children in terms of the in vitro fertilization, babies in test tubes. One of the OBGYNs I worked with as a medical student, he was a reproductive endocrinologist, so he really specialized in those kind of technologies to help people get pregnant. And one day his beeper went off, and he's like, oh, must be the embryos. And I was like, come again? What? And in Louisiana, which is where I trained, he's like, oh yeah, there's this law, I have to carry this beeper, and if something goes wrong at the freezer where the embryos are kept, then somebody has to physically go out there and see what's going on at the facility. And my jaw just dropped. I'm like, really? And he was just so annoyed, had no care or respect at all for the embryos, off in the freezer somewhere, which we know are our brothers and sisters, frozen in time, basically. In the church, we're at a crossroads. What do? Do we turn off the freezer and baptize them? Do we let couples adopt them? Neither is a good moral option. And when we have no good options, that means a few steps up the road, we made a big mistake. So again, we're just to the point, that whole freedom, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want it, however I want. We feel like we have a right to children, and again, that's just not God's plan. So a couple more debunking myths about NFP and I'll wrap up. People will say, isn't periodic abstinence just not really possible? Well, none of us are having sex right now, obviously, so we all go through times in our lives when we're not sexually active, and actually that's part of the beauty of church teaching on chastity. If you're chaste before marriage, then that can make it easier to be chaste in marriage. And some of the nurses that I work with who teach NFP to couples talk about, spice, other ways basically for couples to interact during the fertile time when you're trying to avoid. I think it's intellectual, communicative, creative, emotional, spiritual. So other ways that couples can interact and build the relationships, instead of just the physical aspect. And of course the physical aspect is important, but so are all of those other aspects. Here's an interesting statistic. The national divorce rate is about 55 to 58%. It's doubled since the birth control pill came out in the late 60s. It was about 25%. The divorce rate among couples who use natural family planning is less than 2%. So I think that speaks volumes about how it can help build a marriage and help people value each other and their bodies. Again, our bodies are biological but also theological.